In April of 1963, Dr. King and the Reverend Ralph Abernathy traveled to Birmingham, Alabama, to protest a statewide ban on anti-segregationist activities. King, Abernathy, and dozens of their fellow freedom fighters were quickly arrested and jailed. During his 8 days in detention, Dr. King wrote his famous Letters from a Birmingham Jail, in which he responded to a group of 8 local clergy who had suggested he stay away from Birmingham, calling his actions untimely and unwise. King wrote, "I am in Birmingham because injustice is here. Just as the 8th century prophets left their little villages and carried their 'Thus saith the Lord' far beyond the boundary of their hometowns, I too am compelled to carry the gospel of freedom beyond my particular hometown. Moreover, I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." Tonight, we have the rare opportunity to learn from one of the prophetic voices of our day, who speaks and leads with the urgency and clarity of Dr. King. Eric Ward is one of America's foremost voices on the intersection of authoritarianism, hate-fueled violence, and the fight to sustain a multiracial, inclusive democracy. He serves as Executive Vice President of Race Forward and is a Senior Fellow at the Southern Poverty Law Center. In a career spanning nearly 40 years, Eric made history in 2021 when he became the first American to win the prestigious Civil Courage Prize. Raised in the punk scene of Southern California, Ward has spent his years traveling from his hometown like the prophets of old, confronting and researching white nationalist movements from the inside. His bold and widely cited essay, Skin in the Game: How Anti-Semitism Animates White Nationalism, helped reshape the national conversation on anti-Semitism and its link to anti-Black racism and the rise in authoritarianism worldwide. Eric has been published in The New Yorker, The New York Times, The Los Angeles Times, The Washington Post, on ESPN, CNN, and so many other media outlets. Eric, on behalf of our entire clergy and community, thank you for being with us tonight and for always standing side by side in that single garment of destiny.
Thank you, Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The music, incredibly beautiful and speaking to the heart. Hello, beloved community. I know why you are here, because, like me, you can feel the world trying to harden hearts, and you refuse to allow it to harden yours. Good evening, Central Synagogue. Thank you for receiving me on the MLK Shabbat in this sanctuary and online. Central has never existed for partisan theater. It has existed for moral clarity. And tonight, we're going to practice that together. So take a breath with me. Not a polite breath, a truth breath. Not to perform, to be present. For more than 35 years, my work has been to help communities confront hate violence, anti-Semitism, and racial division, and to keep multiracial democracy possible when fear is being used to divide us. Some of you are here today because Dr. King's call still lives in you. Some of you came because you needed a word so that you could carry on into the new week. Some of you came with pride, with worry, with grief, with all of it all at once. I too come here tonight, a Black man formed by punk rock subculture and movement work. I am a son of Los Angeles who learned early that when a system wants to break you, it does not begin with laws, it begins with a story. A story that says some people do not belong, a story that makes cruelty sound like common sense, a story that turns neighbors into suspects and human beings into categories of enemies. Tonight, we are going to choose a different story, one that is true and unfinished, a story of multiracial, multi-faith democracy struggling to be born. And faith communities, we must be clear, have a particular job in moments like this. Our job is not to be loud. Our job is to be clear. Our job is to keep people human when the world is trying to turn them into categories. Because MLK Shabbat is not a tribute night. It is a covenant night. This week's Torah portion is Vayera. Moses stands before Pharaoh and says, "Let my people go." Pharaoh refuses again and again. And the Torah keeps giving us a line that should haunt a democracy. Pharaoh's heart is hardened. A hardened heart is not ignorant. A hardened heart is what happens when power gets used to being unmoved, when suffering becomes background noise, when cruelty becomes routine, when people say, "That's just how it is," and then they adjust their morality to fit the moment. Va'era is not only about what Pharaoh did, however. Va'era is a warning about what happens when a society gets trained to accept the hardened heart. Here's what happens. The public becomes numb. Institutions become cautious. Neighbors become suspicious. The coalition becomes brittle, and the vulnerable become test cases. That is the plague, and it spreads. Now let me speak plainly if I have not spoke plainly enough. New York is not only a city. New York is a signal. What New York normalizes, the rest of the country learns to live with. What New York refuses, the country learns it can resist. This is not your burden. This is your calling, New York City. This city has become the most capable of leaders in the nation. Many of you are in this room tonight. You know how to hold grief without turning it into hate. You know how to argue and still belong to each other. And you know how to build a moral vocabulary bigger than win and lose. And that is why what happens here matters beyond here. Because right now, the rest of the country needs New York to remember. Minneapolis needs New York to remember. Tennessee needs New York to remember. The world needs New York to remember how to be a grown-up democracy, not a perfect democracy, a mature one. This week, I joined a conversation with Philanthropy New York about breaking the wedge between anti-blackness and anti-Semitism, and the role that civil society must play in the future of that work. Here is the truth underneath that phrase. Anti-blackness creates a baseline. It sets the floor of who can be treated as disposable, who can be blamed for disorder, whose pain can be doubted, whose rights can be narrowed first. Anti-Semitism creates the conspiracy. It creates fog that says, do not look at policy, do not look at power and budgets and votes, look for the hidden puppet masters. One lie marks who can be punished, The other lie explains away who is responsible. Together, they do something that should concern every rabbi, every pastor, every imam, every organizer, every parent. They break the public's ability to tell the truth about power, to tell the truth about the Pharaoh. And when people cannot tell the truth about Pharaoh or the Pharaoh or power, they start hunting each other. That is the wedge. It does not only harm communities, it harms democracy's capacity to govern itself. No, I'm not here to speak in abstractions. We are watching hardened hearts walk through American life. We are watching intimidation dressed up as normal procedure. We are watching government treat schools, sidewalks, and neighborhoods like territory. We are watching private institutions learn to punish conscience faster than it punishes violence. This is not only policy disagreement, this is a moral condition, and each of us in this room understands this. When something starts happening to a society's soul, it shows up first as permission. Permission to dehumanize, permission to scapegoat, permission to say they do not belong, permission to say your grief does not count, permission to say your safety is negotiable. Pharaohs do not start with chains, my friends. Pharaohs start with permission. Now, my friends, hear me. Anti-Semitism is real. It is not a metaphor. It is not an exaggeration. It is not just online. It is an old hatred that learns new clothing. And I am not here tonight to minimize it, not for a single second. I have spent decades watching anti-Semitism mutate, travel, and recruit across the United States, even when many Jewish leaders ignored it. And I have also watched something else. I have watched the Jewish community, sometimes in legitimate fear, sometimes in sheer exasperation, sometimes in righteous anger, choose strategies that do not always actually produce safety. So I need to say a thing to you tonight that is both loving and demanding. We cannot confuse alarm with genuine leadership in this moment. We do not get to confuse drawing the line with communal safety. We do not get to confuse winning an argument with protecting people. Again, I want to say it clearly. Anti-Semitism must be confronted because morality, because we care about our neighbors, and because we care about democracy. And it must be confronted directly. But the way we confront it matters. Our intent never outweighs the outcome. Because if we confront anti-Semitism in ways that shatters a city's ability to unite, we do not weaken hate, we strengthen it. Hardened hearts love a fractured public. It allows them to govern a fractured public. Let me name a pattern without naming a person or institution. In moments of fear, a city gets tempted to turn one public figure into a whole story. One face becomes the stand-in. One fight becomes the referendum. One controversy becomes the national headline. And once that happens, everything becomes a loyalty test. And here is what gets lost. The patient work of building standards, the daily work of building relationships, the quiet work of building rules of engagement, the hard work of keeping a city governable. We end up with a city that cannot breathe. We end up with a city that cannot speak across differences. We end up with a city that cannot model the thing the rest of the country desperately needs: a democracy that can argue and disagree without breaking. Let me say it in the language of faith. Sometimes we mistake right for being righteous. Sometimes we mistake intensity for truth. Sometimes we mistake public punishment for moral courage. But covenant building is not built by humiliation. It is built by accountability and relationship. It is built by boundaries that are clear and compassion that is steady. But I also want to speak to those who hold public power, again, without naming them. If you govern in this city, you have a job to do. You must not treat Jews and Jewish fear as a nuisance. You must not treat anti-Semitism as a public relations problem. You must not let your coalition drift without moral boundaries. You must say clearly and publicly and repeatedly that anti-Semitism is wrong, dangerous, and unacceptable. You must be willing to show up in rooms you do not control. You must be willing to listen without defensiveness. You must be willing to build trust as if America's vision of an inclusive democracy depends on it, because it does. And at the same time, you must protect New Yorkers from being treated as permanent suspects, protect dissent without allowing bigotry, protect speech without allowing dehumanization. That is not a compromise. That is leadership, and that is governance. So what do we do tonight, my friends? I want to offer 5 disciplines that faith communities can practice starting now. 1, tell the truth without contempt. We name anti-Semitism. We name anti-Black racism. We name Islamophobia, and we name them in a single breath. We are the ones who choose to not trade one community's dignity for another's comfort. 2, we insist on equal moral standards. No cheering violence, no romanticizing cruelty, no treating people as symbols, no making any Jew, any Muslim, any Palestinian, any Israeli, any Black person carry the weight of an entire conflict on their back. 3, we build covenant, not cancellation. We call people into responsibility. We correct harm. We do repair. We refuse public humiliation as a substitute for justice. 4, we protect the vulnerable as a practice, not as a statement, as tangible logistics, as visible presence, as courageous accompaniment, as civic training, as honored relationships that exist and have existed long before the crises and horrors that seek to drive us into isolation and alienation. And 5, we build public maturity. Show the country that New York City can hold tension and still belong to each other, because the opposite of the Pharaoh is not perfect agreement. Again, the opposite of the Pharaoh is not perfect agreement. The opposite of Pharaoh is a people who refuse to harden their hearts. I want to close with a vow to you all, one out loud. This does not remain a nice idea. There is no more rehearsal. Divide and conquer must end here. We will not abandon the vulnerable. Again, no more rehearsal. Divide and conquer ends here. We will not abandon the vulnerable. Rather, may we be the kind of people Dr. King demanded of us. May we be the kind of people that the Torah requires. May we be the kind of people our children will thank. Amen.